Just a quick presentation of some of the plants, especially that you'll find at the Urban Oasis site, that I sort of got the chance to see and track their progress and how they've done, I guess, throughout the course of the summer, and which are very conspicuous to find there, especially plants that were planted during the period during which URI is partnered with specifically with the Mill River Trail, and when the Mill River Trail, since they've been active, with brief mention of a couple other plants that you can find that were kind of there previously, put in by the city or otherwise. So I'll just jump into it.
Keith.
Oh, I'm gonna have to start from the top here. Let's see. Alrighty, so and with the trees, one that is rather charismatic and very successful on the site and throughout the trail, but especially in the Urban Oasis site, which is sort of a haven for both people and birds, is sort of the idea of it, is the Eastern Red Cedar. Latin name is Juniperus virginiana. There have been a full 10 of them planted since 2017. And some interesting facts, sort of ethnobotany facts, if you will.
Jay, I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh, you're not getting it?
Yeah. You might have to click confirm in a little pop-up box.
Oh, I may have. I see. Sorry about that. No, it says I'm presenting. That's interesting.
Try it. Just try resetting it.
Try it again. I'll try my entire screen this time. Okay. How's that? You are presenting.
We can see your screen.
That's a promising start. So, yeah. So, woohoo! Alrighty. So, just going through a few of the plants that you'll see, the most prominent ones that you'll see on the Urban Oasis site. So, the Eastern Red Cedar, as I was kind of discussing earlier, about 10 of them on the site. I think there's actually been mortality of one of them, but that was sort of a perfect storm, if you will, from the drought in the past, this summer and the tropical storm. I believe it was the one that was planted in 2019, and those factors, as well as the emergence of a bindweed, which I'll kind of show a little later, which is sort of a twining pest plant, has sort of exploited that young one and led to its decline and death. But generally, they've been very successful on the site, which is owing to their high salt tolerance and drought tolerance. And so pretty much all plants in an urban setting need to be drought tolerant because of the nature of the soil, which tends to be very compact, which leads to less aeration and also less infiltration by water. And so the red cedar, Eastern Red Cedar, has done an especially good job there, and they're really beautiful on the site. Some interesting sort of ethnobotanical facts are that the berries are actually used to this day in the production of some gins and other liquors. Particularly, I want to say in Scandinavian countries, it's not as much of a thing here. And its bark is also still used in some sort of small distillery businesses to produce certain fragrances and essential oils. And a little fun fact about it: if you go on the trail yourself and see this plant, and it's also a way to distinguish it is by the berries, which in this picture they appear kind of bluish, most of them, but they can be a little bit lighter, that sort of palish, I don't know, teal color, I guess. And if you pick one off and crush it and rub it in between your fingers and give it a smell, it smells quite a lot like gin. I've heard it described, and I would agree personally. So it's a kind of a cool little thing to experience. Also, the black gum, or otherwise known as tupelo, Nyssa sylvatica. There have been 3 of them planted on the site, and they've held up quite well actually this summer. Also, especially in light of the tropical storm and all the salt spray and drought, also on a broader sense. that they've been exposed to. So they've done great. Not quite as easy to identify, in my opinion, in any kind of intuitive sense. They have pretty, sort of lanceolate shaped leaves, they're called. Just sort of, I guess, shaped like a lance or a spearhead, I guess you could say. With entire margins, meaning that the edges of the leaves don't have any kind of toothing or serration. So not the most charismatic in terms of identification, but a very good and tried and true tree, and they're doing great on the site. And the fruit is also, I believe it was chosen for the Urban Oasis site in particular, not just because of its hardiness, but also because the fruit is a great food source, favored among many birds, which, are sought to be attracted on site. And a fun fact is that colonists actually would use its wood to fashion pipes, which you usually think of as something that you need a metallic sort of structure to facilitate. But I guess way back before in the pre-industrial days, they actually used this because its wood was so hard, so hard and well textured. Sort of the geometry of the grains is very, very even and fine. So it's not very permeable to water. Also, the basswood American linden. You can see in that bottom right picture that's that's a more recent picture on the site of one of the two basswoods, Tilia americana, that are found on the site. But actually, since that picture was taken, it's dropped a lot of those sort of brown and crinkled, sort of droughty leaves, and sprouted new leaves, actually a new batch of leaves, which it has had a remarkable ability to do effectively. And so it's really making a big resurgence, which is great. So yeah, I mean, the storm, especially in just the drought this summer, generally was tough on it, but it's fighting back, and we're feeling positive about that. It's also great for bees, so it's a great attractant for pollinators, especially. So birds and the bees, things that we love to see on site. And they can produce actually a very, very nice, very fine honey from the nectar. So maybe something to look into. And also, sort of interesting fact is, certain Native American peoples used to crush their leaves for making eye washes and poultices. It's kind of fun. So nothing was wasted, really. Red maple, Acer rubrum. This might be one that people are more familiar with seeing, I suppose. It's I would say the maple leaf is pretty distinctive and iconic, I might even dare say. It's beautiful, especially when exposed to full sun, as they are on site. They'll get just red all over, many parts of them. The petiole, which is sort of the stalk of the leaves, if you will, is red, as you can see in this top picture. The bottom right picture is a great example of how the young shoots and the buds themselves, the flower and leaf buds both, can be a really stark and striking red, and the leaves themselves, like as you can see in these young leaves, actually a lot of tree species display redness in their younger tissues, but that's sort of before they develop their light capturing capacity fully. But even mature leaves in red maple can be really quite red sometimes, which is very interesting. Also very important for birds and several moth species, interestingly. So adding to the diversity on this site, adding to the diversity of sort of winged fauna that you'll find here, which is actually quite a lot, and especially at this time of year. Can be tapped for maple syrup, but you wouldn't want to do it yet, and not until it grows quite a bit older. Put too much of a stress on it. And fun fact from the past is pioneers used to make ink and dyes out of it, which is perhaps not surprising because of all of the red pigments that you can find in it. So moving on to shrubs, bayberry, a very prominent, probably the most prominent shrub that you'll find on the site. Personal favorite of mine. I just love it. They have a very pleasant, kind of subtle scent. Especially, well, if you tear off any part of them, if you kind of pull off a leaf or pull off one of the berries and rub it in your fingers, it gives a really nice scent. Kind of hard to describe in terms of I can't really compare it to gin or something like that as you could for the Eastern red cedar. But because of the sort of the natural waxiness of the berries and also covering sort of the leaves, which helps protect it and lends to its hardiness on sites similar to the mill along the Mill River too, which has made it so successful, has also made it popular for producing candles out of it, interestingly. And of course, the nice scent, I think, is a part of that too. It's less of a primary food source for birds, but it is important in the wintertime, especially as a sort of emergency food source after many of the other plants would have already been sort of all of their food sources that they produce would have been already fully exploited. So it's a nice kind of reserve for birds, and they keep the berries, which can make them very distinctive to identify even after the leaves fall off, which they don't. They may or may not, especially with warming temperatures and climate change. I would say they may, as the years go, they may actually on the site continue to retain their leaves in the wintertime, which would be very nice and further both add sort of visual attraction for anybody who's walking the trail and also kind of help for more cover for birds as well, sort of thermal cover to keep them warm. But the berries are kept and they can range from this green color in the top picture to a more sort of grayish color in the bottom right there. So that's sort of a distinctive identifying feature to know so that you can tell that it's a bayberry. So there are several, I'm not sure exactly how many willow plants, which are not really the willow that you might think of being like the charismatic sort of weeping willow. These are actually not tree willows. They're more occupying a lower growing shrub habit or growth form. And several have been planted on the site, especially because they're really good at stabilizing shorelines. And so the sort of the sloping bank along much of the trail is an ideal place to plant them because of their really very intricately spreading roots that spread sort of laterally. And also, if there were interest in further years in further stabilization along the shoreline, or just interest in aesthetic appeal of the black willow, Salix nigra, it's really easy to propagate. All you have to do is you can cut off basically any part of it, be that a root segment or a shoot segment, and maybe douse it in the cut part in a little bit of sort of rooting hormone, which you can readily procure, and literally just stick it wound side down into the ground, and they do great. Actually, some other groups that I worked with this summer did a bit of that, notably in Edgewood. Not Edgewood.
Edgerton?
Yeah, Edgewood Park. Excuse me. So yeah. Also, sweet gale, Myrica gale, very closely related to our bayberry here, and you can kind of tell that they have similar leaves, so it can be hard to tell them apart maybe at a glance, except for that they won't have the berries that the bayberry will have, and also they won't quite have the same scent. But still have been quite successful on the site. Again, somewhat fragrant, maybe not quite as prominently as the southern bayberry, and not having those berries quite so as a sort of little identification key. But they also have, I guess, the leaf shape is sort of characteristically, it sort of tapers off towards the base of the leaf gradually and is more rounded towards the edge with a few little teeth that don't. So you'll see some teeth towards the rounded edge, but they don't extend into the base of the leaf, which is sort of a point of commonality between the bayberry as well. So you can, again, it's kind of hard to tell one from another, but you'll know it's one of the two of them for sure. And it has a nice smell. Another sort of liquor theme on this one. Its leaves, especially, it doesn't have the berries as the other one has, but its leaves still are quite fragrant and have been used for flavoring schnapps in some Scandinavian countries. Interestingly enough, not as much of a thing here in America. I'm not sure, but maybe we can start something up. And the oils also, interestingly, can be used as an insect repellent because of some of their specific chemical compounds in them. Winterberry holly, people may be more familiar with this one. Very easy to tell because of its red berries, busheling sort of clumps of red berries, which are distinguishable from other red berried plants, especially because they'll have this little black dot that's sort of protruding out on the bottom side of each of the berries. So that's a surefire way to tell. And they keep their berries through the wintertime also. So very important food source, especially in the winter for many of the birds that we try to foster along the trail and along the urban oasis especially. And it's also been used extensively historically by certain Native American peoples for medicinal reasons, especially for treating fever, interestingly. And as mentioned here, it is evergreen, so it will generally keep its leaves in the wintertime. So you get that nice green-red contrast. Another one with sort of that same leaf shape, kind of as the other Myrica species, those being the bayberry and the sweet gale. You can see again in this top picture sort of illustrates how it has just a sparse number of sort of teeth or serrations only on the end of the leaves, but not really anywhere else. And that's even more pronounced on these leaves than other ones. It's another holly called inkberry or shamrock. This variety is called shamrock, the cultivar specifically, Ilex glabra or glabra. Glabra meaning smooth, coming from the Latin root meaning smooth. And so the leaves are actually very, very smooth, as you can see clearly in that bottom right picture. And it has similar berries to the winterberry holly, just dark. Instead of red, they're typically really inky black, hence the name, but also with that sort of black dot on the bottom, which gives them away if you want to identify them quickly. Yeah, they are classified as semi-evergreen, so they will keep their leaves if it's mild enough winter. And in Connecticut, especially by the shore, I think we're in a hardiness zone is 7A, I believe. So, and the higher the number of the hardiness zone means the warmer the winter generally. And so in such a relatively mild temperate climate, they'll actually keep their leaves, which is nice, as well as their berries. And again, it's a nice food source for birds, and bees and other pollinators like to use them as well. Buttonbush, you'll see a lot of these. They're pretty easy to notice because of their really wacky looking fruits, which I believe is the source of their namesake. These kind of big button shaped things, which are interestingly a food source for water birds. They're sort of a super fruit, if you will, in that each one of the buttons produces many individual seeding fruits that can be plucked off. So many waterfowl like those. Certainly you'll see a lot of water birds along the trail commonly. And also they're good nesting habitat for sparrows and red-winged blackbirds as well. I'm not sure if I've seen any red-winged blackbirds yet on the site, but I wouldn't doubt that they're there. And interestingly used by early settlers to treat malaria. So still a thing, I guess, but I'm not sure if people use that nowadays in the pharmaceutical industry or not, but it's an interesting little fact. A couple other little honorable mentions, I guess. I didn't manage to get any pictures because I couldn't really locate them on the site. But we've got red chokeberry. Looks a lot like the winterberry holly, sort of red ilex, but the sort of the bottoms of the berries are I'm not sure how you describe that, but coming out sort of in less of a discrete sort of knob or button. And the leaves are also quite different. You can see they're sort of serrated all the way across, whereas with the ilex, it's I'm getting it mixed up with the inkberry. It is also serrated all the way across, excuse me. So maybe not the easiest to tell apart, but regardless, if you manage to find that, yeah, please let JR know. I didn't manage to locate it, but I'm sure it's there. Also cinquefoil, a sort of low flowering shrub. New Jersey tea, there's only one of these. Quite distinct flowering habit, but I also wasn't able to find it. And then some perennials, just to mention them real quick. Bee balm, and these kind of all, of course, in general, just are good for pollinators, so they attract bees and moths and butterflies and other pollinators. So bee balm's a good one for bringing in insects. Coneflower is a winner as well. I managed to find a little bit of it, but I think this was early in the summer, but now it's actually much more conspicuous, especially since more of these other weeds that surround it have been removed. And it's had more of a chance to really sprout and grow up after the sort of challenges that all of the plants face early in the summer. So much more conspicuous now. So I encourage you to check it out and walk the trail and see if you can notice it. Very easy to tell from that big sort of globular inflorescence or flowering growth in the middle. And so blazing star, I also wasn't able to capture this one, but quite distinct. And then some other ones I noticed, mullein verbascum species. I don't know as much about it, but it's very, very readily conspicuous in the site, and yeah, a good native pollinator attracting, but not one that was planted specifically. It's sort of you wouldn't call it a wild flower, but a wild sort of plant. Same can be said of the pokeweed, although this is more, more for the birds. Would like to eat these sort of dark berries. So sort of small dark berries with seeds that would be inside are generally tells you that they're kind of engineered, so to speak, for birds. That's definitely no exception. There are a few hardy rubber trees when you get sort of closer to the roadside, closer to head towards Grand Paint, that direction of the sort of that far reach, the urban Oasis site. You see a few hardy rubber trees which were planted, I don't remember exactly, but some years ago, certainly, before really the Mill River Trail was in its seminal stages. And so they're very much established on the site and correspondingly very healthy. And at least the bottom left and the right-hand side pictures are actual pictures. The top left is one I got off the internet to illustrate sort of the distinctive looking sort of splotchy bark, which you can identify it with. But the other two pictures are actually pictures that I took on site. And so you can see just how incredibly robust and healthy it is. Again, planted a long time ago. And then here's some unidentified plants, which maybe JR, if I haven't taken up too much time already, maybe JR can say a couple words about, any initiatives or any interest that people may have in identifying these. And a cool way to do that. So that left one is a weed of some kind. I'm not sure, maybe there's quite a diversity of them. Just two invasive pests I figured I'd mention that we had trouble with this year, but we've actually dealt with very well. JR and the team especially have really nipped it in the bud, quite literally. And so the top left picture is actually of a juniper, the first plant that I showed in this presentation, a juniper tree or bush. And you can really hardly recognize it anymore because it's been totally dried out and exploited by this bindweed, which is it's been a very important agricultural pest in many parts of the northern hemisphere. And it's really taken off here. I believe it's taken off more as a response to already stressed plants because of the drought, and so it's when they were already a little bit weakened by the drought and different challenging circumstances that plants faced this year. But it is typically considered to be an annual. And so if you can kind of remove it one time, then it'll get easier and easier. I mean, especially if you can remove it before it has a chance to drop its seeds, then it'll really just be a one-time affair and you won't have to worry about it the next season. That may or may not be the case. We'll see. But even if it isn't, it's fairly easy to deal with. You don't have to, even though it twines all the way around plants very extensively, you don't have to worry about untangling the whole thing. You really just got to snip it out from the base. Either just simply snip the base, or even better if you can pull out the roots, which really pull quite readily, even though they spread very extensively. So, but yeah, as I said, JR and the team have done a great job of taking those out. So that's been exciting. Tree of Heaven. I don't know where it gets such an auspicious name, but you could also call it the Tree of Hell because of how invasive it's been across the city and also many urban sites in general. It's great at capitalizing urban places and open sites, and it's a very fast grower. It looks a lot. It can be tricky because it looks a lot like a native plant. Namely staghorn sumac. It has very similar leaves, but you can tell it apart easily. Firstly, because the staghorn sumac is very fuzzy. Technical terms here. So on both the surface of the leaf, especially the underside of the leaves, and also on the sort of twigs or petioles of the leaves are just very hairy, which I believe is where it gets the name staghorn. It's kind of fuzzy like a stag's horn. Whereas the Ailanthus, Tree of Heaven, Ailanthus altissima, is rather smooth or glabrous. And also the leaves are not quite as toothy as the sumac. But there is sort of one tooth, which is not really a true tooth, but a gland rather, a special gland, which you can see really clearly illustrated in this top picture, which is a dead giveaway for this plant. So that's one good way to identify it. At least if you can eye it from up close. It can be harder if you're looking up at the canopy from the ground, like in that bottom right picture. But if you can snatch a leaf, it's even easier. If you snatch one, rip it off and tear it up, give it a sniff. I don't know. I've heard it described many ways. Some say it's like burnt peanut butter. Some describe it as similar to maybe like a pad thai. I'm not really sure. I think that's a bit of a high compliment, but I definitely give it the burnt peanut butter. But I'd encourage you to. You'll see some still on the site, but again, we're doing. JR and the folks have done a great job of cutting them back, but they're really quite insidious. But give them a sniff and see what you think. They're pretty trees, but we definitely want to clear them out to make room for sort of natives and more pollinator friendly trees. You can really just hand pull them if you want to help remove them as you walk in the trail. The small ones, at least, as they get bigger, they can be pretty stubborn. So at that point, just leave them. And then definitely dispose of the uprooted plant, which is kind of general weeding advice, so that they don't resprout. And that's really all I've got. A little bit longer winded than I may have intended, but I hope that was somewhat informative. And JR, if you wanna take it away from there.
Sure. Well, I want to give an opportunity if there's any questions. I had one, and
Sure.
that was about rubber trees. Do you know if those are native at all? I feel like rubber trees sounds like something that isn't local, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Hardy rubber tree. Yeah, I actually don't know that much about it. I want to say no because I've never seen any like in the field or in forests around here. But that I should say that with a caveat because a lot of the trees that you'll find in urban settings, even native ones, you may not find that easily out in the wild because you'll only find them in like floodplains, which have analogous sort of soil characteristics and sort of breathability and sort of water regimes as you'll find in the city. So I'm not entirely sure. I guess, but I would say definitely look it up if you're curious. But I'm not sure because a lot of the trees, interestingly, that were planted early on in the city, you'll find a lot of Norway maples, for instance, that were planted the furthest from native that you'll find. So Norway maple, I mean, across the country, really, especially in cities across the Northeast, Norway maple was a very popular tree. I'm not entirely sure why. I guess because it's big and has a very sturdy structure, stable against wind. Um, I don't know. I guess just maybe people just like maple trees. But you'll find those all over the place, and they're very far from native, as the name I guess would suggest. And some others, like Callery pear, the London plane tree is another big one in New Haven, especially. Yeah, just no, actually, kind of all over. But no, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, we can look into that. It's curious to me that we have rubber trees.
Yeah.
So I muted the other folks. If you have a question, feel free to jump in and unmute. But I'm going to just do a little promo for iNaturalist. So in my own adventures in identifying things, I've found it's really great to have an application on my phone called iNaturalist. Now, this is the web interface, and I am actually zoomed in here to the Mill River, and it logs all of my identification. So you can see around Connecticut, I have a few different ones. There's some up here in North Haven, on West Rock, but primarily I've been trying to understand what's around the urban oasis. And what's really amazing about this is, in addition to keeping a log of my pictures, so here you can see all of the points, and these are all plants. So common evening primrose, for example.
So one I thought was horseweed, I think.
Here's some other ones. Now, each one of those I can look at and see the various pictures that I've taken in location. So this is the primrose. And these are I took several pictures so people could look at it. And then I did the identification. Nobody objected to it. So other people can look at it and tell you that you are wrong. You can also compare. So this is purslane, or so I thought it was purslane. And I can look at other pictures of purslane that people have taken just by clicking that compare button. And so very clearly, this looks like a pretty good match, even on revisiting it. So this is a nice way to get to know your plants, to log what you have done, to compare it with others, and to join a community. So there's actually different community projects, and you can create a project. We could create one for the Mill River. Maybe we should. And when people do their observations, it will then be grouped into that, and you can see what everyone else has done. So that's an overview, a teaser really, of iNaturalist, and I'm happy to answer questions, or just we can answer questions for either of us.
I have a question. So is there a way to pull up a map of the Mill River itself? And Jonathan, could you kind of show something of myself and other viewers who might watch this recording of specifically where these urban oases are, if you want to kind of orient the newcomers?
Good point. I, in fact, have a map up, Jonathan. So do you want me just to share that?
Yeah, please do.
So hopefully this map is visible, and you can see New Haven here, and we have Fairhaven, and coming in from the harbor, you have Criscolo Park, which is a popular park, and the Mill River, and this is Ball Island. You might notice there's a large power plant here, and just on the other side of Grand Avenue, one of our main thoroughfares, behind Grand Paint, you have a little path, a path that recently has a new gate added. You can follow that path backwards, and right where it takes a turn is the area designated as an urban oasis. And there is a sign that was put on location by the Peabody and Audubon and other partners to help you understand what you might see there, what we hope to see there, in particular around birds. And this is where we've been planting trees and these shrubs that were talked about, and I have been working on observations. Does that help to orient sufficiently?
That's great. Thanks.
Any other questions? If not, Jonathan, I just want to say thank you for your work this summer and for collecting these slides and producing this presentation that gives us a better sense of what's there. I know that I'm going to go back and take another look at the berries and some other plants and try and distinguish where I may not have noticed they were actually different species.
Yeah, yeah, and it's tough with the hollies sometimes, but yeah, kind of a lot of species of the similar family or genus, certainly related species, so it can be tough to mix them up, but yeah, should be, hopefully that's a fun thing to do, and it was my pleasure, of course.